Good morning, friends. It's great to be with you this morning. Grab your hot coffee or hot tea and let's dive into God's Word. Today we're in 1 Timothy chapter 3, talking about leaders or really overseers in the church. Let's dive in. This is a trustworthy saying. If someone aspires to be a church leader, he desires an honorable position. All right, so let's pause right there. So if someone desires to be a church leader, now he's not just talking about any old church leader, pastor, leader in the church. He's talking specifically about an overseer, a bishop, or what we might call an elder. There's lots of different names that we see attached to that in the various church settings. And so if someone aspires to be an elder, if somebody aspires to be a bishop, if somebody aspires to be an overseer of a local body, and so it is the highest level of authority in the local body, in the local area, is the title. It's the reference that Paul is making here. And we know that Paul instructs both Timothy and Titus. We'll see this as we get to Titus as well, to look for elders, overseers, these leaders, these men, and put them in positions of authority over the local church. And so again, this is one of those areas where there's lots of different views on church governance and how church governance should work. And I'm going to express my view of this. We believe this because Paul says it very clear. If someone aspires to be a church leader, he, speaking of a man, desires an honorable position. And so again, he's talking about not just any old leadership of church, but he's talking about specifically that governance, that top role of authority in the local church. All right, let's keep going. So a church leader, same word, must be a man whose life is above reproach. So what does it mean to be above reproach? He continues, he must be faithful to his wife. He must exercise self-control, live wisely, and have a good reputation. He must enjoy having guests in his home, and he must be able to teach. He must not be a heavy drinker or be violent. He must be gentle, not quarrelsome, and not love money. He must manage his own family well, having children who respect and obey him. For if a man cannot manage his own household, how can he take care of God's church? Okay, so this again, giving us a list of, we might call these qualifications, but I would just encourage us, this really goes beyond just qualifications. These are great attributes, great virtues for all of us, male or female, to be aspiring to, because this tells us what a quality life in Christ looks like. When we're being a whole person, very much what Paul is encouraging us here is he's encouraging, let the whole person be a Christian. You know, very often, especially when somebody is young in Christianity, and Paul will address that here in just a minute, we have a bifurcation of like our spiritual self. This is who we are with our religious friends, we're church friends, and this is who we are with our secular friends, our worldly friends, maybe people we work with. And Paul's saying, hey, we're going to have none of that. If you're going to aspire to be a leader, and really if you're going to aspire to be excellent in the faith, these are things that we should all be aspiring for. So let's kind of look through the list. First of all, a man whose life must be above reproach. In other words, he's got a quality life. People are going to look at him and say, now that's a good person. And so how does he define that? He must be faithful to his wife, or other translations, probably I think a little more accurate translation, a man of one wife. In other words, he's not in polygamy. He only has one wife. Some have taken that to say he's never been divorced. We don't believe that. Certainly I don't believe that. If the divorce was a biblical divorce, it doesn't disqualify a man from leading. But he must be faithful to his wife. In other words, he highly values the covenant of marriage to a single person. That's really what it's talking about. The emphasis is on marriage. And that takes us all the way back to Genesis 1. You know, God created the male and female. The very first thing God did when he created humanity is he created a marriage. And so Paul is holding this in that exact same priority. It's the number one thing. We must have a quality marriage, must value that. He must exercise self-control. In other words, have the fruit of the Spirit of self-control, not be somebody who is just, flying off the handle all the time. You've got to live wisely, has a pattern of wisdom in their life, and has a good reputation. In other words, the pattern of wisdom and self-control is demonstrated in the reputation in the community. People will look at that person and go, yeah, that's a wise person. That's a person that has self-control. He must enjoy having guests in his home. In other words, must be hospitable, must enjoy being with people, because how else are you going to make a disciple? You know, so much of what Jesus did in making disciples was across the table, being able to engage with somebody at a meal, be able to host them and engage with them in that sort of relational environment. And so to be, certainly to be an elder or a bishop, overseer, or also to just be a good Christian, we've got to learn how to be hospitable. It's very important. And he must also be able to teach. You have to be able to explain. Doesn't mean you have to be a master teacher or have a degree, but just have the ability to explain the tenets of the faith. He must not be a heavy drinker, which does not forbid drinking. And I know different people have different views on that, but it's not a drunkard. He's not somebody that's drinking too much. That's something that's in control, not an alcoholic. Or be violent. He must be gentle, not quarrelsome, and not love money. Other areas of life, just, not quarrelsome, not always trying to win an argument, not divisive, but also not loving money, not being all about trying to make it in their career. They got to focus. Again, there's a balance in their life. Manage his own family well, having children who respect and obey him. That doesn't mean children have to be perfect, but that means he's attentive to the family. This is people, and again, the application can go both ways for all of us. We as parents need to be attentive to our children and not off doing our own thing, so that we have children and we're parenting them well so that they would be those who respect us and obey us. And for a man cannot manage his own household, how can he take care of God's church? And again, certainly for the overseer, but also goes for any of us. Let's keep going here in the text. He says, a church leader, again, same word, must not be a new believer, because he might become proud and the devil would cause him to fall. Also, people outside the church must speak well of him so that he will not be disgraced and fall into the devil's trap. In other words, if he's living a duplicitous life, it's going to catch up with him. So make sure that people outside are speaking well as within the church. And again, that's an important attribute for all of us. So Paul kind of ends his list there, and now he's going to go to the next level of leadership, which is deacon, which in the same way, he said deacons must be well respected and have integrity. They must not be heavy drinkers or dishonest with money. They must be committed to the mystery of the faith now revealed and must live with a clear conscience. Before they are appointed as deacons, let them be closely examined. If they pass the test, then let them serve as deacons. In the same way, their wives must be respected and not slander others. They must exercise self-control and be faithful in everything they do. A deacon must be faithful to his wife, and he must manage his children and household well. Those who do well as deacons will be rewarded with respect from others and will have increased confidence in their faith in Jesus Christ. All right, so we see here Paul is giving very similar instructions to the deacons as well as he does to the overseers, the bishops, the elders. And he's saying, look, they need to be well respected. They need to have integrity, not be heavy drinkers as well or dishonest with money. He gives a very similar list between the two different groups. Now, the difference between an overseer, bishop, or elder is the role of governance versus a deacon, which literally kind of means servant. It's one who goes and serves, who's actually doing the work in the ministry. Now, again, very interestingly, Paul, in his letter to 1 Timothy, is obviously referring to men as deacons, though we know straight up, as we looked at the other day, in Romans chapter 16, he calls Phoebe a deacon. And so obviously females were also appointed as deacons, though Paul is addressing here just as men. Now again, like we were looking at yesterday, that may very well be because of the specific situation that Timothy found himself in this environment. Because of the whole thing with Diana and all that was the temple to worship Diana there in Ephesus, as well as the women coming in, getting saved and thinking they were going to be the priest, and just like they were there and leading. And so there might have been a hold off there before the women were allowed to be deacons, as we see very clearly Phoebe was in Romans 16. So we don't know exactly, but we do know that all of these characteristics are good characteristics for all of us to strive for. It's good virtue of what it means to live the Christian life and truly walk it out in every aspect of what we do, both in terms of our spiritual life and our professional life and our parenting life and our friendship life, all of our relationships, all of our leadership, all of the ways we exert influence throughout our lives should come through this idea that we're Christians first. That's who we are. We were bought with a price. Jesus paid a price, and he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And so we're trying to live this life his way. And when we do, this is the fruit. This is what it's going to look like. Well, we love you guys.
We love y'all.
Have a